Folks, next up, we have Tom from Fluence coming to talk to us about monetizing open source via the decentralized cloud stack. Tom, we're so happy to have you here today. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for having me. Really thrilled to be here. You hear me okay? See me okay?
Everything's great. Take it away.
Awesome. Cool. I'm gonna share my screen here. So let's we'll get started. Great. You got that?
Got it.
Cool. Listen, thanks everyone. Thrilled to be here. Here to talk about Fluence, which is an open application platform, and we're we do a couple of things, but we're really the open source monetization is something that we think we can greatly enhance. And it's funny, we just got off a call with one of the big open source foundations just literally 5 minutes ago, and they were happy to hear that we didn't say open source is broken, because there's still a terrific amount of companies out there and a lot of people who have been quite successful in monetizing open source. And so what we think we can do is enhance it and significantly grow the open source marketplace and actually inspire a huge amount of new entrants into the open source community. And so it's obviously, the blockchain community is a core open source element, but it goes far beyond the blockchain community. And we think 40 million developers, I think, are in the open source community, but we think we can expand it far beyond that. So let me explain a little bit how I think we can do that. First, what is an open application platform? It's where applications can safely build on each other, share data, users, and have no risk of the access being disabled. And so there really, I don't think, is an open application platform of any scale right now. And so this is somewhat of a new term, and I think we have to explain a little bit about what the benefits of that are. And trust me, we'll get to open source monetization shortly. So why does this matter? Well, what does an open application platform, what are the benefits of it? Well, first, it's freedom. And so the peer-to-peer network makes it impossible for access to be disabled. So there isn't a central point of failure. There isn't an arbiter. There isn't a government that can shut you off. That's kind of a really kind of core freedom point, which I think resonates with a lot of people in this community. Second, speed. An open application platform, you can actually, especially using our language, Aquamarine, you can compose applications from existing code and build far, far faster. And so you can create applications from other live applications. And that is, I think, an innovation which in itself will generate a terrific amount of innovation. And there's no need to build or integrate all these complex back-end core technology. And so you can just add features, and I'll get into this in more detail later. And then rewards, and this comes to the open source monetization part here. An economic layer that tracks software usage. And so the way I'm going to get to kind of the key piece here, you'll hear me say a couple times, the way we think you actually can grow the open source community and by monetizing it is not by charging for it necessarily. It's not by donations. It's not by grants. It's by sharing revenue with hosts. And so the whole model of Fluence is around a peer-to-peer hosting model where software that's hosted is initially offered by the core author. Hosts agree to a particular split of their revenue with that author. And so anything that's on Fluence, the user just sees the hosting cost as they would a normal application, but some of that goes to the actual author. And that's, I think, a key piece we'll get into more detail on. So how does it work? You need a distributed compute protocol. So you have trustless hosting, you've got to have that. You have to have a programming language that simplifies composition and, most importantly, allows you to work with live applications. That's critical and doesn't really exist now. And then thirdly, you need this blockchain-based economic layer. And that tracks software usage and enables compensation based on that usage. And that's also key because you want people to have the incentive to write code that's useful and is used, and then to be compensated that way. And you also want people using it to only have to pay when their applications are used. And so that is a very symmetric incentive combination, which we think is important. But really, you got to have all three of these pieces. And there's plenty of people who build compute protocols, and there's plenty of blockchains out there. But you got to have all these three things together in order to really create a comprehensive solution that ties everything together. And so what is this another way to think about this? Let's talk about DeFi. And DeFi is obviously one of the most compelling success stories in our universe, over the past year. And we've seen the explosion we've seen the explosion in use and in value and in products and in companies. And if we take a step back, sort of philosophically, what's driven that? It's really driven by composability. And so everything in this decentralized finance space, it created like Legos and building blocks, and people can easily stack them on top of each other, copy one, break it off, take a piece, use it somewhere else. And that composability makes innovation so much easier, because you can just add features, fork them, or fork a protocol, fork an application, add some new features, and in a week, a month, even faster, you can have a brand new application that you didn't have to spend a year developing. And that composability, there's no greater evidence of the innovation that composability creates than our DeFi ecosystem. And so what Fluence is trying to do is to create that same level of composability, but for the whole web. And that's a little hard to wrap your head around. But let's think about what the DeFi on-chain Legos really are: assets, NFTs, stable coins. Obviously, DEXs are a critical piece of that. So if we think about what that is for the web, it's oracles, databases, data processing, and backends. And so our goal here is to create and make those off-chain Legos on Fluence as interoperable and as composable as all the pieces of the DeFi ecosystem, the DeFi stack. And that is actually not as hard as it seems, given everything on this right-hand side is open source. And so if those things that aren't, can easily be built. And when there's incentive to build them because there's economics behind it, it makes it even easier. And so we envision this world of very composable applications that's hard to even really conceptualize, the way traditional people in finance could never have conceptualized DeFi 2 years ago, let alone longer. So let's talk about exactly how this will work. So I talked about composability. So think about a couple of key services down at the bottom. We may call them modules. You can call them anything you want, but open source, a web API, infrastructure services, and databases. And a couple developers, one developer could easily use those and quickly put together a white labeled chat app. And actually in our launch on, I think it was November 6th, we actually did this pretty much in real time and created a chat app in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something along those lines. It's that easy to do when you have these components that you can just wrap together easily. So say someone creates a white label chat app, easy to do. It's got a handful of users represented on the right-hand side. Fine, nothing so special about that, but it's done. Well, guess what? Because it's on Fluence, you can then fork that app and just add a little feature to it. And so someone decides to add stickers, and you've got like a messenger clone in new UI. Someone else decides, I like that chat app, but I want to add stories. Well, guess what? There's sort of like an Instagram type application with a new UI on the left. Each one of those has its own, generates its own user base, its own user ecosystem. And so now you've got, and by the way, those didn't have to rebuild the whole thing. They just added a feature in a new UI. Well, guess what? Some new developers can come along and say, great, I love that messenger one, but I want to add a much fancier UI. And someone says, I like that, but I want to add stickers to it as well. And now you have two more applications, brand new UIs, slightly different features, but different markets, different users of interested in them. And you have now more users. And so each one of these applications can be created incredibly quickly, just focus on a couple new features and a new UI, and target an entirely different market. And guess what? They're all interoperable. The users are all shared. And if you go all the way back down, those open source kind of components at the bottom, databases, infraservices, web API we started with, well, guess what? Those authors are rewarded all the way down at the bottom of the stack, all the way down the bottom of this chain, because the use of their code is tracked via blockchain. And as all the stuff is hosted on Fluence, a share of all this stuff works. And so what is likely to happen here is, let's just say that the white label chatbot has a couple of people that use it, Messenger is a couple, and then a ton use the fancy Messenger up top, the sort of Slack one, or a ton of people use one. Well, guess what? It only takes one of those to be used significantly for a lot of hosting to be required, right, to support those users. And then from some of that, all that hosting revenue, some of it flow all the way down to those core components at the bottom. And that is what's so great here, is that this innovation is so quick and so easy that people can just experiment very quickly, very easily. They don't lose much time, effort, or money. And it's just like constantly trying, and when one hits big, well, guess what? Everyone wins in this ecosystem. And that's the real idea here. And so how does this work? I sort of talked about this a couple times, but this is a picture of it. So the end customers are paying for the usage, they're paying for the hosting, and there's a license fee that then goes to the author. An important piece of this is it's not a donation, it's not a grant, and it's determined in advance, and it's executed via blockchain based on use. And so this is all determined in advance. It can't be, host can't say, I'm not going to pay that actually, because it's smart contract driven. And so it's part of the whole kind of stack here. And that kind of that's a very critical piece of making sure that everybody is rewarded as intended. And so, what does Fluence really enable here? I've talked about this before, but you can obviously innovate quickly. It's also scalable. And I think this is really important. When you're building an application, I think people here probably recognize that the infrastructure you need for 100 users is different than 10,000, which is different than 1 million, which is different than 20 million. And if you're building this on an open system like Fluence, your infrastructure use scales with what you need, because the hosting providers scale with what you need, and your open source code stack scales with what you need. So you don't have to go and rebuild infrastructure throughout your sort of life cycle, which is obviously kind of the winner's curse, if you will, which is every kind of inflection point of growth, developers are back at work recoding, rebuilding everything to meet the increased demand, which is incredibly inefficient use of resources, given most of that has already been done before by somebody and is available. And frankly, what is more usable is if that effort was instead spent on enhancing the experience, the tools, the user interface, and kind of the features. And so that's kind of what this is all designed to enhance. And it's also secure. Given it's a distributed peer-to-peer network, if one host wants to cut you off, well, guess what? You can easily switch to another host. And that is a very important point, especially given this era of deplatforming and even shadow banning, which I think is something that's not nearly talked about enough. And so, Fluence really revolutionizes the way applications are built. And the other thing that's really important here is it only takes a couple innovators to really demonstrate how easy this is to do and what a success it is, because all it takes is a couple people to innovate, build an application which is widely used, and right there you've got users, and you will then have revenue flowing down to kind of the people that authored those core components being used. And so that's a really exciting thing. It's not as if you're building an eBay here where you have to have a whole bunch of buyers and a whole bunch of sellers in order for it to be a success. We think we'll end up having that level of scale, but that you don't have to wait for that to happen, because anyone could build something very attractive on this pretty soon and be a big success for everybody. Another way to look at this is we separate authorship from runtime. And I think that's relatively standard in open source, of course, but I'll just mention it because it's a little different here because of the hosting revenue. But if you are a developer and you want to create code, you create these applications, you publish, and once you published, that's out there, it's gone. Same thing as is in the existing world. If you want to publish an upgrade, you can do that. That's a different piece of code. It's a different license. It's a different permission is out there. And it's a user decision to upgrade, because once you publish your first, your code, as long as there are hosts who will host it, other applications can use it. And so as long as it's economic to host that, it will get hosted. You want to publish something else with more features or fixes bugs, people may upgrade to it, may not, up to them. And so that is, you as an author are very separated then from the code which is out there. And that's not unusual, obviously, in this open source space, but it's this, if you go to the runtime, you as an author, you can't disable it, and because you can't disable it, everyone out there is then all the developers, all the applications can build with confidence on top of it, because they know they won't be disabled. They know it can't be turned off. So that's not that dissimilar from some clouds today. Difference obviously being the hosting revenue is shared with the author. And so we think that will keep the author very involved, publishing upgrades, doing bug fixes, etc., and actually reward them for their ongoing involvement and engagement. Eric Raymond wrote a terrific book years ago about the cathedral and the bazaar. And it's worth kind of pulling that analogy here, because we all know that in software development, the cathedral model has had challenges. And there's obviously places where it's worked, but everybody, I think, in this conference, everybody in our blockchain world recognizes that the cathedral model of a closed ecosystem with a centralized authority, with top-down hierarchy, is really inefficient. And there's actually reasons for that actually transcend just software, but the larger the team is, the complexity increases dramatically as the communication overhead increases. There's actually sort of math reasons why kind of complex systems ultimately collapse, whether they're political, software developing, or anything else. And so what everyone here obviously has recognized, what works incredibly well is the bazaar. And so the bazaar, we all know here, has generated a huge amount of innovation as independent autonomous developers collaborate and build with little overhead. And this is sort of almost embarrassing to put programs here because everyone here knows them, but that has led to a huge innovation, and really kind of benefited society ultimately to have this level of collaboration. And so if you think about this type of collaboration and the ability to have that collaboration and that openness, that's existed for software. But why not have that exist a level higher at applications? And so that is really what Fluence does. Is it has the bazaar model, not just for software development, which works well and we can enhance by monetization potentially, but it's this open peer-to-peer network combined with Aquamarine that allows applications to be forked and allows applications to be innovated. And I use the word be innovated, as quickly, as easily as open source code can be. So, I mean, this is a bit of a mind change because everyone's used to their code being published and then people tweaking, enhancing, moving on. That's a kind of mental model everyone's comfortable with. We haven't yet gotten as comfortable with people saying, here's my application, and there it is. And oh boy, someone just took it and added some features and new UI. No one even recognizes it anymore. And now they're generating a ton of users for it. But I'm still going to benefit from it a little bit for sure. And so that is what we really want to enable here, is this bazaar model, this collaboration, this forking of applications. And when you can do that, you innovate so much faster. And this goes back to the DeFi, where this is sort of what DeFi did, because DeFi is a bit of a hybrid between obviously code and applications, and they're obviously applications, but this is that, but taking it way out of taking it further away from just being blockchain based, finance based to everything. So imagine if you could take, your, I don't know, your mail app, your flight app, your travel, whatever it is, and someone says, I like that, but I think this should be a little bit different. Change those, change those components to it, slightly new UI, and there you go. And that is where we think this whole world ultimately evolves. And by the way, it kind of has to, because if it doesn't, we all are subject to the domination of the large tech monopolies. and their developer ecosystems are enormous. Their resources are effectively unlimited. And so how can we, compete with that level of company? The only way is through the global developer universe. And that's exactly what Fluence enables, is it enables the whole world to come together and just look and innovate off of applications, collaborate, build in an open ecosystem in a way that's never before been possible. And that is really, I think, necessary in order to return the web to its initial roots, which was a decentralized platform for information and to be shared openly without kind of gateways, arbiters, kind of limits and bottlenecks and choke points. And I think that's once we get to this application development forking, which we're effectively there, we really enable that to happen. And I think that is pretty much the only way that we can move beyond where we are right now. And if you even think everyone obviously takes Facebook as the poster child for squashing of companies, and the sort of the ecosystem is littered with companies that Facebook and others have shut down and have not been able to compete. But even more recently, you've seen Amazon be able to just kick off, an application off its servers, and you saw Parler be kicked off. And you may not like Parler's politics or their users, and for very legitimate reasons, but you saw Amazon in a very arbitrary fashion just take them off, gone. Their business, they're not up yet, right? And Lyft apparently spends 14 cents per ride. I think it's either AWS or Azure, because it's too hard, too complex, and too expensive and too uncertain to move their stack somewhere else. It's crazy that right now, those several hosting companies dominate to that level. And this concept at Fluence of a peer-to-peer hosting model with everything open and shared and composable is pretty much the only way we have to prevent these companies, whether they be the hosting companies, whether they be the social networks, from really continuing to dominate our entire world and dominate even further. So where do we stand? We were founded in 2017. We published a number of DWeb surveys. We've reached out to hundreds, almost thousands of developers over time. And so really worked to build our ties in the ecosystem. That way we've raised $7 million. We launched our compute network on November 12th. And the Aquamarine scripting language is live. And we're launching this blockchain economic layer in mid this year. And so, that is going to be very exciting, but you can check us out right now. We're on fluence.network. And, as you can tell, I've used the word innovation many times in this talk, but the idea here is to empower the next wave of internet innovation. And we obviously look, you mentioned the goal, I mentioned Tim Berners-Lee earlier, but the goal of the web is to serve humanity. And we kind of use this quote here because we don't even know exactly what can be innovated on top of us going forward. We just know if we provide the right tools and the right platform, there'll be terrific products as a result. And so we want to be able to enable the ecosystem to build such things that we cannot ourselves imagine. And so I think we're directly aligned with Tim's original concept here. So find us at fluence.network and at Fluence Project. And we have, we've had a couple of, exciting bounties here, and we look forward to engaging with as many of you going forward as possible. So thanks very much. Thanks very much for your time.
Tom, that was awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, again, you couldn't be with us today, but we were so happy to have you.